This day and time. What happened today, years ago.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack a stack of sources and pull out the key nuggets of knowledge for you. Today is June 27th, and with June 30th just around the corner, we're focusing on some really pivotal historical moments. They all happened on that exact date, just in different years. We've got sources covering, well, major shifts in global power, the start of a key regulatory body, and also the really complex fallout from colonial rule.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, isn't it, how one specific calendar date can be this nexus point for such different yet hugely impactful turning points. So our mission today for this deep dive is to explore 3 specific June 30th events. We want to understand their immediate impact, their lasting significance, and maybe find some threads connecting them. You should walk away with a hopefully clearer picture of how these specific days really did reshape nations and actually the world.
Okay, let's unpack this first big moment. We're going up into the skies over the United States, back to 1956. Now, this was a time when air travel was just booming right after World War II, more people flying than ever. But the sources we looked at really highlight a major problem: the air traffic control system. It was seriously lagging behind all that growth.
Lagging behind. It lacked key technology, like widespread radar coverage, and it relied maybe too much on pilots just flying visually. Visual flight rules, especially at higher altitudes.
Which naturally raised a huge question about safety. And then on June 30th, 1956, near the Grand Canyon, this dangerous gap in how airspace was managed became tragically clear.
Absolutely. 2 passenger planes, one was United Airlines, the other TWA. They were both flying at the same altitude, following essentially the same scenic route over the canyon, and they collided mid-air.
It's just, harrowing to think about. All 128 people on both planes were killed. That made it, at that specific point in time, the worst civil aviation disaster anywhere in the world.
Globally, yes.
And what really stands out from the sources, I think, is that both planes were allowed to fly under these visual flight rules, VFR. Partly, it seems, so passengers could get those amazing views of the Grand Canyon.
Right, a sort of scenic detour.
But the crash also happened in an area with no radar coverage. And getting the debris out of that rugged terrain, incredibly difficult.
The significance here is just immense. I mean, this accident sent absolute shockwaves through the American public and definitely through the political world, too. It starkly exposed just how deficient the national air traffic control system was. It was a real wake-up call.
And the pressure from this incident, it directly led to something concrete.
Exactly. It led straight to the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. And that act established the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. This was a new independent agency given broad powers to manage airspace and ensure safety across the entire U.S.
So a direct line from tragedy to regulation.
Pretty much. If you connect this to the bigger picture, it was a really crucial turning point. Not just for the U.S., but it influenced global aviation safety standards profoundly. It changed how air travel would be regulated worldwide.
Okay, so from that shakeup in the skies, let's pivot. We're moving to Africa now, jumping ahead just 4 years. June 30th, 1960. Our sources describe the Congo a huge, incredibly resource-rich Belgian colony.
And one with particularly dark history.
Right. It started as the personal property of King Leopold II, infamous for brutal exploitation, before eventually being transferred to the Belgian state itself. By the late 1950s, though, the whole continent was changing. The independence movement across Africa was just exploding.
Yes, the pressure was immense, both from nationalist movements inside Congo and, the wider international mood shifting against colonialism. Belgium found itself under intense pressure and made a sudden one, maybe even a bit hasty, to grant independence.
And that happened on June 30th, 1960. The Republic of Congo, which later became Zaire and is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, it officially declared independence from Belgium.
A landmark moment, obviously. The end of Belgian colonial rule.
But what's fascinating, and also quite tragic, is what happened almost immediately after. Our sources suggest the hasty preparation, or maybe lack thereof, combined with significant external interference. It just plunged the new nation into crisis.
A severe political crisis, yeah. It led pretty quickly to internal conflict, a prolonged civil war eventually, and the collapse of Patrice Lumumba's government. He was the first prime minister, and his government fell just months after independence.
So it became this kind of textbook example almost of the huge challenges many newly independent African nations faced.
Exactly. Internal divisions, legacies of exploitation, and often external powers meddling for their own strategic interests. It was a really complex and difficult transition.
And for a maybe memorable detail from that day.
Ah, yes. The sources highlight Patrice Lumumba's speech at the official independence ceremony. You had these sort of measured diplomatic speeches from the Belgian King Baudouin and Congo's first president, Joseph Kasavubu. But Lumumba, he delivered this absolutely raw, unvarnished condemnation of all the suffering under colonial rule.
Wow. Not pulling any punches then.
Not at all. It was powerful, completely unfiltered, and it really sort of set the tone for the immense struggles that lay ahead for the country. A really stark moment.
Okay, let's fast forward again. We're moving to a much more recent June 30th, this time 1997, and our focus shifts to East Asia, Hong Kong. Now, for over 150 years, Hong Kong had been a British colony.
Right, a complex history there too.
Yeah.
Acquired in stages after the First Opium War in 1842, expanded in 1860.
And then the new territories were leased in 1898, crucially, for 99 years. As that 99-year lease started nearing its end, China became very clear. It wanted full sovereignty restored over all of Hong Kong, not just the leased territories.
Which sets up this really intricate diplomatic situation dealing with a legacy of empire and modern international relations. Our sources detail this incredibly historic handover ceremony. It took place on the night of June 30th, 1997.
Where was that held?
At the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center, a huge purpose-built venue. And the symbolism was powerful. The British Union Jack was lowered, formally marking the end of, well, more than 150 years of British rule. And then up went the flags of the People's Republic of China and the new Hong Kong Special Administrative Region.
What's fascinating here, I think, is the sheer scale and the global attention on this. It really felt like the end of an era for the British Empire, but also the beginning of something new and maybe uncertain with this one country, two systems model.
Exactly. That was the framework agreed upon. Hong Kong was allowed to keep its distinct economic and, importantly, political systems for 50 years after the handover. It was a unique experiment, really.
And this handover, it clearly had huge geopolitical implications. Our sources definitely stated profoundly impacted Hong Kong's future.
Absolutely. It reshaped dynamics in the region and globally. And for a sort of poignant detail, the sources note the ceremony itself happened under a steady rain, kind of added to the solemnity.
And the laughed British governor.
Chris Patton. Yeah, reports say he was visibly emotional as he departed Hong Kong on the royal yacht Britannia. Those small human moments, they really underscore the enormous historical weight of what was happening. The end of one chapter, the start of another, very different one.
So we've covered quite a bit of ground, all anchored to this one date, June 30th. When we look at these three events together, the push for air safety leading to the FAA, the really complex and painful birth of an independent Congo, and then the huge handover of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
What does it all tell us?
Well, it definitely shows June 30th has been a day for some truly seismic shifts across different domains: technology, politics, geopolitics.
It feels like a concentration of major change.
Yeah, I think so. And if we connect them, maybe it highlights how quickly the world can change, how decisions made, sometimes under intense pressure in a single moment, can just reverberate for decades. And also how the end of one era, whether it's less regulated skies, colonial rule, or a long-term lease, often brings in completely new, sometimes quite unpredictable challenges.
Right. So for you, the listener, looking closely at specific dates like this gives a kind of concentrated view of how history unfolds, often dramatically, and with connections you might not expect.
Exactly. It shows history isn't just a smooth line. It has these sharp turning points, these moments of intense pressure.
And maybe that leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. How do those immediate, intense pressures of a historical moment, whether it's a terrible accident like the Grand Canyon crash, or a political demand like Congolese independence, or the end of a colonial lease in Hong Kong, how do those immediate pressures shape the long-term path of nations and even global systems?
Yeah, that's a great question to ponder. How much is planned and how much is just reacting to the crisis of the moment?
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.